The code compiled successfully, but no one stopped to ask what happens when it runs. We celebrate technologies that make our lives easier, yet we rarely examine the moral cost of this convenience. Every automated task removes a point of friction, streamlining our daily routines. However, by eliminating the effort required to choose, we also bypass the active deliberation that defines ethical character. We fall into a pattern of deferring to the path of least resistance. When systems pre-select our options, the need for conscious evaluation vanishes, leaving our moral muscles to atrophy. This frictionless choice architecture makes decision-making effortless, but it also makes it mindless. We follow recommendations because they are convenient, not because we have judged them to be correct. It is an ethical debt. By letting design decide for us today, we trade away our capacity for future judgment, accumulating compromises that we must eventually face and pay down. The promise of technology is to liberate our time and attention, yet when it also liberates us from the effort of moral reasoning, it leaves us unprepared for difficult choices. The core problem is that convenience breeds moral inertia. The easier a choice becomes, the less likely we are to question its values, accepting pre-selected defaults without active reflection. Under this design, moral courage is slowly eroded. Active ethical choices require effort and resistance, but when the environment optimization prioritizes ease, we lose the habit of facing difficulty. This erosion is consistent with agency loss. The user remains the active party, but their involvement is reduced to passive agreement, leaving their personal values disconnected from their actions. The consequence is the rise of automated autopilot decisions. We trust the system to navigate complex choices, assuming its parameters are aligned with our own principles without active verification. This autopilot behavior raises the stakes of design. When convenience dictates action, the values embedded in the platform's code become the default ethics of the population using the system. This conformity can diminish our capacity to recognize injustice. Because the automated flow is so smooth, questioning its direction requires a level of friction that most users avoid. Of course, we must define the convenience paradox. It is the condition where technology, by making choices easier, reduces our capacity for the very active judgment that makes choices meaningful. Moral inertia is the tendency to remain on an automated path because changing direction requires cognitive effort. It is the psychological force that defaults exploit to guide user behavior. Ethical debt is the accumulated consequence of these deferred judgments. It is the moral cost of outsourcing our active evaluation to platforms optimized for metric performance rather than human values. The distinction matters between mechanical ease and moral agency. Mechanical ease refers to the reduction of physical steps, while moral agency requires the active evaluation of reasons for action. Active deliberation is the process of weighing reasons under an ethical framework. It cannot be automated because it requires a conscious commitment to values that go beyond technical efficiency. Moral courage, in turn, is the willingness to act on those reasons even when the path is difficult. It is a capacity that must be practiced to be maintained. When algorithms restructure our choices, they prioritize convenience to keep us engaged. This design makes reflection feel like an unnecessary burden, encouraging us to remain in passive compliance. Therefore, convenience is not ethically neutral. It carries an implicit judgment about the value of effort, suggesting that ease is always preferable to the friction of active personal deliberation. The causal mechanism begins with the optimization of ease. Systems are designed to anticipate our desires, presenting selections before we have even formulated a conscious intent to choose. This anticipation reduces the space between impulse and action. By removing the pause where reflection occurs, the system steers our choices toward immediate gratification rather than thoughtful evaluation. Over time, this loop conditions us to expect immediacy. We become intolerant of delay and friction, which makes any effortful ethical deliberation feel like a systemic failure of design. We begin to outsource our judgment to these anticipatory flows. We assume that if the path is smooth, it must be the right path, merging efficiency with ethical validation. Not can we, but should we. We must ask whether a life optimized for absolute ease is one that allows for the cultivation of character or if it diminishes us. The design can make moral questions feel obsolete. When an automated system manages resource distribution, we look for optimization rather than asking if the distribution is fair to everyone. This framing shifts the burden of evaluation from user conscience to system code. The designer sets the constraints and the user simply navigates them, assuming the ethics are handled. This assumption is where ethical debt compounds. Every time we let the system choose for us, we accept a tiny moral compromise, gradually aligning our behavior with platform goals. The system's incentives are rarely aligned with our moral development. It seeks retention, clicks, and seamless transactions, values that often conflict with the slow, difficult process of active judgment. When we conform to these values, we experience a dilution of moral responsibility. We feel blameless because we only followed the default path, while the platform disclaims responsibility. This gap is the core of organized irresponsibility. No single person chooses the unethical outcome, yet the system produces it because no one was encouraged to actively contest the default. The convenience of the system acts as a barrier to critique. Questioning the default requires us to reject the ease we value, forcing an uncomfortable choice between comfort and conscience. And yet, this comfort is what we actively seek. We choose the platform that requires the least effort, allowing convenience to dictate which systems we trust to organize our lives. This pattern of choice can lead to a systemic erosion of accountability. When everyone defaults to ease, there are no agents left to answer for the outcomes the system produces. The final state is a landscape of passive compliance. We navigate a world designed for efficiency, having traded our active moral capacity for the convenience of an automated existence. We must examine the boundaries of this critique. One defensible position is that convenience is necessary to manage cognitive overload in a complex world where choices are infinite. Indeed, automating routine choices can conserve mental energy. By letting a system handle trivial scheduling or filtering, we can focus our active judgment on high-stakes ethical dilemmas. A rational exception exists when convenience is aligned with safety. In critical operations, automated defaults prevent human error under fatigue, showing that ease can sometimes preserve life. One limitation is that this critique varies by ethical framework. From a consequentialist view, if convenience increases overall happiness, the loss of active agency is not a moral failure. Conversely, a virtue ethics approach would insist that character is built through effortful choice, making the systematic elimination of friction a direct threat to moral growth and integrity. A validating case is found in simple checklist systems. They provide convenience and consistency in medicine, but fail when complex ethical trade-offs require flexible human judgment and empathy. These boundaries show that convenience is not inherently harmful. The moral risk arises when we apply the logic of ease to decisions that require active human conscience and responsibility. To resolve the convenience paradox, we must reassert the value of friction in decision-making. We must recognize that effort is not a design defect, but a necessary component of judgment. This means that designers must build systems that prompt reflection. They introduce deliberate pauses and choices at critical points, forcing users to step off the autopilot track. We must also change our cultural narrative around technology. We should evaluate platforms not just by how much friction they remove, but by how well they support our active agency. This evaluation requires that we pay down our ethical debt. We must choose to engage effortfully, questioning defaults and seeking alternatives even when the convenient path is right there. We are still responsible. We cannot blame the smoothness of the interface for our own failure to deliberate. We must answer for the actions we permit through our passive consent. Reclaiming control requires that we practice moral courage in small ways. We must cultivate the habit of questioning convenience, building the capacity to choose the difficult path when necessary. The resolution is to use automation as a tool, not a replacement for conscience. We delegate mechanical tasks while retaining the authority to evaluate and direct the final outcome. By introducing intentional friction, we create the space needed for reflection, This reflection is what allows us to align our daily behavior with our deeply held ethical commitments. Ultimately, the goal is to design technology that respects human dignity. We need architectures that support our capacity to choose, ensuring that ease never becomes a substitute for character. As an application, we can begin by identifying where we have outsourced our judgment. We can review our digital habits, locating the defaults we accept without active thought. Consider this: when we consciously override an automated recommendation, we build the habit of active choice, strengthening our capacity for deliberation in more significant areas of our lives. We can also establish an evaluation framework for new technologies. We should ask whether the convenience offered is worth the potential loss of active involvement in the decision process. This inquiry helps us separate technical efficiency from ethical legitimacy. A system may save us time, but that does not justify letting its algorithms define our choices for us. Furthermore, we can look at the stakeholders affected by our convenient choices. By considering their well-being, we can see the hidden costs that our convenience imposes on others. We must also ask who holds accountability when an automated choice leads to harm. If a system default causes injury, there must be a clear path to human responsibility. This approach preserves the unresolved trade-offs of technology. It does not demand a return to manual complexity, but it insists that convenience must never override our moral agency. By asking these questions, we make the moral cost of ease visible. We reclaim our capacity to choose, ensuring that our lives are guided by active conscience rather than defaults. Friction is where active ethical awareness lives. We must choose when to accept ease and when to resist it. The machine is learning. The question is, what are we teaching it?